Dr. Power, your guests have arrived.
Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, folks. Come on in. There's a seat over here and one more over here and two for you there. Well, welcome to Session 7. This is the second last session in our series. I hope you're enjoying them. I certainly am. As I say, the one after this is the last. It's gone so quickly, our short time together. But hope you found some value in our little time we did spend together. The strategic leadership is what this session is about. Along with ethics, corporate governance, those sort of things, we start thinking about the softer side of the house. And to that end, I was pleased to make a video that we'll put up in the bonus section shortly. We had a CEO come in, Caroline Casson, who has set up and is very involved with and has done a wonderful paper on strategic leadership. And she's agreed to make it available to you folks in the bonus section for reading after the course is over for those interested in strategic leadership. Assignment 2, you've got them back by now. The feedback is you've done well in the course. I'm pleased with what I've seen. You certainly are pulling it together nicely. And I think you're seeing that common thread in every business, every sector, that the disruption that's taking place, the turbulence that's taking place, the need to reposition every business, every industry as a result of this new industrial age of robotics and artificial intelligence, etc. It's completely changing how we're going to do business. And I sense from your papers, in your business sectors, you're getting a feel for what's coming through the fog at you. And as strategic leaders, your job is to reposition your organizations to accommodate, either exploit the opportunities or mitigate the damage that is going to be caused by this new phenomenon that we're going into. The individual papers that you're working on now, the Cirrus case, said you've had your choice how to do it, either seriatim, just deal with the questions, or if you want to spend time and effort, you can do it as a report. I'll be looking for those answers somewhere in the report. And I'll give you some extra feedback on that if you like. But the marks are exactly the same. So just say question number 1, don't bother repeating the question. Just give me the answers and bowl through it, and that works for me, and they'll get you the grade that you're looking for. But you have a choice, 2 ways to do this for those who are strategists at heart and want to try the long way. But same marks. I'll do my best to get them back to you before your exams. I've got 30 some odd people in the class, and my feedback generally is extensive. I expect about 10, 12 pages. And you'll find it valuable, but it takes some time to prepare. Let me see, exam. Yeah, exam next week. Next Monday, the start of week 8, I will send to you the actual blank exam, all filled in, except I'll take out those particular sections that will tip the hand as to what the exam content happens to be. But the format, the layout, how many questions, what their values are, etc., the name of the case that I've asked you to have a look and read ahead of the exam, you'll get all that from me next Monday. And remind you that there's 2 exams. There's the regular exam, and there's 1 or 2 of you that aren't able to write on that exact exam date. And so we've made a separate exam for you folks. Same sort of format, same sort of ideas, but a different case. So make sure you understand that if you're doing the regular exam, do your case. If you're doing an alternate exam, 1 or 2 of you may not be able to write at the appropriate time, then make sure you do the right case. Nothing wrong getting together with your friends, sitting discussing. I won't give you the questions this time, but you've had a bunch of context questions, context cases. You've had your own case that I give you the questions. And so now I'm asking you to sit down with your colleagues for a few minutes, having read the case, and ask yourself, what questions will the old fart ask us? And you'll be pretty close by just your guess. You can practice writing them. You can read the case ahead of time. My point is the temperature should come down for the final exam. You should not be overly concerned about it. You'll do well. As I say, failure is not an option in this class. If you fail, then I've failed to do my job to bring you along and give you what you need to get through this course. That's 50% of the exam. 5 questions, different weights depending on the length of the questions. The front end is 50%. I think I'll give you 6 short little questions in there. Each take about half a page to a page probably. And they're not repeat 10 points on page 69. That's that surface learning. This is little stuff that, frankly, you know already. If I gave you the exam today, you would pass it today just talking to me, because you've done it, you've internalized from our discussions and from your readings. You've got a sense of what it's all about. I might say to you simply, no man is an island. Discuss in the context of strategy. And here, of course, we talk about the world is like a global spider web. A tug on one strand distorts the whole spider web. And we're all connected. No longer are we silos. We are, as you see from our discussions every week, that a small little ripple, a small little impact, something takes place in the Ukraine, it rolls and could impact our strategies, our families, our nations here in Canada. So, and no answer would be the same. There's no exact wording for this. It's You just give me some sensible, critical thinking about that short little question, or it may be something on a model explain. It may be a quote by Porter, a quote by Sun Tzu. Explain. Simple as that. So that's the exam. Fascinating. I enjoy Madam Secretary, a television show, and I hope you see it too. It's a little bit to the left of center for in some cases, but nevertheless the plot in this plot line was good. The last one I saw, and it involved in Siberia the defrosting of the muskeg as with global warming, climate change taking place. The muskeg is softening up, and as it softens, of course, things that died 1 million years ago, our ancestors, animals, etc., died, and they died with diseases that we didn't have vaccines for today: smallpox, anthrax, etc., etc. And this was all frozen in situ. And some viruses can be frozen and stay dormant for that length of time. And I think it was one of your colleagues raised it, so I think it's worth talking again in case you missed it, that I think it was 2015 in Canada's north with the muskeg. I think it was Canada's north, maybe it was Siberia, but Canada's north got the same situation in the Arctic. They found that anthrax came alive again after being frozen in time. And so things like smallpox, anthrax, etc., that we think we're pretty well cleaned up in North America having, could possibly reemerge with what's going on with this global warming. So it leads me to another so what out of all this is the need for a pandemic plan. A pandemic plan for your family, one for your organization, one for your province, one for your nation. And frankly, folks, we don't have pandemic plans. You will not be alone for 24 hours, 48 hours. You'll be alone for 2 months, 3 months. Puerto Rico, think of situations like that. And particularly if you live on the island like Vancouver and there's no food supply after 3 days. Where do your food come from? Where do your meds come from? Where does the water come from? And fan-out systems, etc. The local hospitals won't cover you because they've got a certain capacity, and frankly, they're booked out now in capacity. Just visit an emergency room on a Friday night, and they're lined up and bunked out in the middle of the halls. So we do not have the facilities for pandemics. And so maybe this week we could talk a bit about the need for pandemics, pandemic planning, and what you've done in your organization, share with your neighbors as maybe best practices. It would be helpful to us. Well, let's go on to the paper if we can today. There's an article in the Globe again, going back to see, and I have to confess again, to my pleasure, I don't see any strong anti-bias against Trump, so I may just resubscribe. But I say I'm right-wing until the Hun. Ottawa offers direct subsidies to low-income tenants, and so they're going out of their way for almost not a guaranteed annual income to make sure the low-income folks have a place to live, which the money really is like a guaranteed income coming to these people so they can have a place to live. And it led me to believe, and part of the story, of course, we all see it in the planning. Our cities are saying to people that, developer, if you want to build here, you will build so many low-cost housing to get the right mix. So you have the high-cost housing and the low-cost housing in the same complex, and increasingly that's the solution by government. But I'm thinking about that for a minute. Is that fair? Folks that are in the high-class housing are frankly subsidizing low-cost housing, the individual. So you and I buy a house, we're paying a premium for that to the developer, so they in turn can build the low-cost. Is that the role of government to put it on the individual, or is the role of government to put it across the collective? And it's not the developer's problem, but it's if government wants to change it, let government change it, as opposed to putting it on your back or my back if you're unfortunate enough to buy into one of those complexes. A question for discussion today. Parents scramble in Ontario as they cap the after-school program. They've cut down, in essence, that funding is an issue, and so they've said we can only afford to put your children into daycare 3 afternoons a week, not 5. Well, certainly it saves money for the government, but the reality is, how does that single mom or single dad out there go to work in the afternoon 2 days a week if there's no place to nurture and bring up the child? And so we have to look at that a little bit, and it leads us to, again, what we talk about this week, the idea of ethics and corporate social responsibility and corporate culture and things like that. I think firms that actually have daycares within their organizations are a happy culture to work in. I know the Ministry of Health, males and females down there don't mind working quite as much when they can walk downstairs in their break and their lunch to the daycare center within the same building and see the youngsters. And so maybe it's incumbent upon us to think a little more out of the box on making our place more friendly for families. I thought, anyway. But let's have a discussion about that. It's, again, a responsibility of government. Article in here on the Ukraine back in 2004, just one of these history things actually the Globe commented upon, and what it's done. But it led me to this sort of conversation that we started last week, that George Soros, this international financier, runs the Quantum Group, $18-some-odd billion he put aside in a special fund to fund these type of organizations that are against Britain's exit from the European Union. They support Black Lives Matter, etc., and they support the globalization thrust in the European countries, open borders, immigration, community one-size-fits-all. He very much promotes this and supports and funds this, and he's been trying to do that in the Ukraine with this sort of clashing taking place. And I found an article that the American government apparently supports $700-some-odd million to the Ukraine, but it's for support of globalization over there. And so here are the Ukrainians putting up a double barbed wire fence along their southern border. Only 99% of the immigrants, people crossing from through there on the way to Europe, get stopped at that border. They can't get through the Ukraine, so they go around it. And so they're doing those things that Trump is talking about for a southern border. And frankly, Canada should be doing some too, as we wander into Quebec and into southern Canada. And so the question becomes here is, why is America State Department seems to be out of control? It's not following along with what Trump's vision is, but rather they're sending $700 million over there to help globalization, to help immigrants, to knock down those walls. And so it's an issue there. But of the two, the Ukraine and Poland have come back up. They're both strong countries, extremely strong countries in relation to some of the European countries. And because of their stance on immigration and one thing or another, they're holding together. And I sense Soros wants to knock them down and loosen them up a little bit. So let's talk a little bit today about the Ukraine and Poland and what's going on there. Oh yeah, NAFTA is going on. Another meeting took place. They're still fighting over there on the automobiles and the percentage of made in America, made in Canada cars to take it in, and all have hard-nosed responses. We also have the boards, the egg board, dairy board, etc. in Canada. That's a heartburn for the Americans. And so my sense is that I'm not sure this NAFTA renegotiation is actually going to see its way through. I could be wrong, but let's talk a little bit more NAFTA. It makes a big difference in your life, my life, Canada, and how we craft our strategies if we do not have a NAFTA trade agreement with our biggest trading partner. 72% of whatever we do, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, goes across the border. And if that somehow has got some impediments on it, it's going to hurt the national GNP big time. So let's have a look at that. Solid proposal. Ottawa is withholding the funds for the Camp Calgary Olympic bid. We talked a bit about the Olympics last time. I think we talked about, is it really value for money? Here they're talking about $4.6 billion to hold the 2026 games in Calgary. A province of only 4 million people. $4.6 billion. They don't have it. We know the situation for Alberta. So what they're spending is the children's money to have this wonderful Olympics. And surely we don't need $4.6 billion to put on a set of games that people can come and run around the track and have the same sort of fun. But they're doing it, and it's a concern. So let's talk about that. But anyway, Ottawa wants to see a business case of where the money's coming from and how it's going to be spent. So far, they're unable to come up with it. Quebec to cut income taxes and reimburse school costs. What I found interesting there is that first time in a long while, Quebec is $2.2 billion surplus. And we might look at that as the way to lead. Normally they run like Ontario in a deficit position. The Prime Minister is looking at the appointing a top Supreme Canada's Chief Judge. We had McLaughlin, female. Her time is up, 75, has to retire, and he's now thinking who to appoint in place of her. Looking at Justice Alba, also a female, 71, from the province of Quebec. And we've had this thing in Canada that the two founding nations, the Chief Justice will always be either an Anglophone or a Francophone in alternate patterns. But the demographics have shifted in Canada. 22% of the people in Canada are visual minorities. And so I wonder how they feel when there's always either an Anglophone or a Francophone as the Chief Justice. Why couldn't there be an Asian or an Indo of some description as a Chief Justice. Maybe his time has come to talk about that. This drives me crazy. It makes my steam come my ears with my feeling on the Revenue Canada. And they've just been audited by the Auditor General and found that 29 don't see the number off the top of my head, but something like 29 million calls to Revenue Canada were turned away. You all call Revenue Canada, you get that. We're busy right now, hang up, call again. 29 million, there's only 34 million people in Canada, and that includes the kids. 29 million were turned away on that answering machine. And so to get their numbers up, so it looks like they're within 70-80% of the people get a call, they just put the answering system on. Don't report that when they say that our return to calls and that to people, we're really high up there. But the reality is they're lying to us, and the Auditor General has just called them out on it. And so let's talk a bit more about the Revenue Canada, and once again underscores the need for flat tax. Let's close it down and do what Trump is doing, that 90% of the people in the States will do their income tax on a postcard by themselves. Let's work towards that. Trump gave a pardon to a couple of turkeys yesterday, this week. This comes out Monday, of course. It will be last week, Thanksgiving for you. The winning was drumstick, was the winning turkey, but he announced towards the end, I watched it, he said, "Can I pat him?" And he did. So it was kind of funny. Certainly there's some other folks that may need his presidential pardon shortly. Laurier University backtracks. It reprimanded a teaching assistant who was debating the gender pronouns about he and she and when's to use it, when's appropriate in the class. And so she brought in a video and had a conversation about it, and the powers to be jacked her up, saying this stuff should not be talked about in the class. And so it seems to me this political correctness, we're moving into the idea that gender is a bad thing. We can't say man, we can't say woman. I can't say hello, lady. You can't say hello, man. It's got to be greetings, good people, or something like that. And I just wonder, have we gone too far in this? These strange names that at least are foreign to me. U.S. sanctions North Korea. Chinese firms increased sanctions, put them back on the Trump put them back on the list of state sponsors terrorists, and superimposed some more stranglehold on the economy for North Korea. It's interesting, North Korea has not fired any missiles in the last 2 months. Lots of beating on the chest and thumping and spitting on the ground, but no missiles. And so maybe it's working. But it was interesting that as a result of Trump visiting with President Xi in China last week, just after Trump left, that Xi sent an ambassador, representative from China, to meet with Kim Jong-un, and Kim wouldn't meet with him. And yet China is the feeding hand for North Korea. And so it's really out of control a little bit. China has also canceled all its plane flights into North Korea. And you could ask why. It may just be another sanction. It may be he's got some notice that take care of your people just in case we do a bombing run. I don't know. But there's things happening over there we should be aware of and watching, because, again, it impacts on how we do business. Opioids, won't go into that, but certainly it's on every paper these days. This is crazy. Another thing that makes your ears pop. The senators in our wonderful place, the place of second sobering thought, just spent $225,000 of your money, my money, children's money, to buy 1,500 bronze medals marking the 150th anniversary of Canada, and they were for giving out to any senator who wants one, and every senator can give away, I think it's 12 or something, to people that work hard for their communities. Wow. And these are the same folks that when they get $145,000 a year for a salary for sitting in the Senate, they get a generous pension, golden pension when they retire, all the medical perks, $150,000 in annual office expenses, $22,000 in annual living expenses over and above their salary to be a senator. And so the question becomes, does the Senate make sense anymore? Do we need that second sobering thought? Should we get rid of the Senate altogether? And it raises another question to me. The Queen celebrated her 70th wedding anniversary this week. 1947, got married to Philip. Do we need a monarch in Canada? She's the Queen of Canada. She's our Queen. We have representatives of the Queen, lieutenant governors, and governor generals. And what would the difference make if we got rid of the Queen? And I'm going to suggest to you that we need the Queen. But let's have that conversation. If we didn't keep the Queen, you'd have a President Trudeau today, with all that entails and runs around. We've seen that the Governor General has the power, certainly in BC, to appoint who the new leader will be when the Liberals won the election, appointed the NDP as the best alternative to give it a try. And so they still retain some sort of power in the province. But I think having a monarch, having a Queen of Canada, makes us something different than just a presidential tweedledee, tweedledum sort of organization. It elevates us. It gives us that extra measure of control that I think we need. It makes us truly Canadian. If we lose the Queen, British, and with the immigration and the demographics and the shift in Canada, we're going to change the flavor of this country. And maybe that's what we should be doing. Maybe we should get rid of the Queen. Australia did. But let's have a conversation this week about the Senate. Is it needed? And let's have a conversation with the Queen. Is she needed? Our journalist out to get Trump, and he goes on, Harvard study showed that the tone of Trump coverage has been twice as negative in the early going, according to his predecessor, Barack Obama's numbers. I think most of us agree that most of the American mainstream media, whatever that means, has been less than fair with Trump. Site C Dam, I'll talk about that in a minute. Merkel, that's an important story. Merkel's trying to put her coalition together in Germany. She has been the driving force. She is the glue, the anchor that holds the European Union together, the euro together, and is very much like the Iron Lady from Britain, Margaret Thatcher. She's the one that makes it tick. It looks like she may have to go back to another election because she can't put it together. The right-wing folks are coming up, and they have a different vision of the world on immigration and other things, and they're growing stronger, as we saw in Austria, taking it over. And so it's dead in the water right now. And so we want to watch the outcome of that. Do they go back for another election if she can't pull this thing together? And what's the role of France? It seems to me France at this point may well become the core, the thing that holds this thing together. And what will become of Britain and the British exit if Merkel is no longer at the helm? Because she's been very, very headstrong with Prime Minister May on what the settlement terms are going to be to get this thing to come apart. So there's lots of things happening there. The euro, of course, is an alternate vehicle currency. Lots of things riding on the strength of the European Union, and Merkel plays a big part in that. So let's look at that. The Keystone Pipeline. RBC joins the global 30 biggest institutions as too big to fail. And as a result, they've got to put more net free capital aside. And net free capital, in essence, means for every dollar I give the bank, they must hold so much in actual cash reserves, or they can't get it as a mortgage, a loan. They just have to sit on it. It's just paper sitting there, but they must hold it to make them liquid. And that number goes up and down. At the time of the 2008, the problem was they allowed the net free capital to get small in the States, and they didn't have, when somebody knocked on the door and says, pay my money, they couldn't raise it fast enough and put some run on the banks. And so they upped it to 7%. And it goes up and down as policies set. But they've said to the Royal Bank, because you're too big to fail, you're going to have to raise a little bit more net free. And that's a good thing. It means the Royal Bank will be a very safe bank to deal with compared to the other banks, which is a good thing. The bad thing is that if you're holding shares in that company and looking for dividends, they're going to have to do a little better with their arms tied behind their back, because 10% of their capital is stuck over here and they can't use it for investment purposes. So we'll watch that. Keystone Pipeline, tentatively go ahead. There's still opposition opponents. They're still going to appeal the decision. It's still not cleaned up entirely, but we've had that discussion about this whole pipeline deal and the capitalization, getting the money back in the light of alternative energies and fuels coming in. Does it still make sense to spend over $10 billion putting pipelines in when alternative energies could be here in short time? And just as they did that, of course, Trump just approved this in March to allow it to go forward for hearings. and last week there was a 5,000 barrel spill out of the pipeline and blackened all the topsoil, good earth, and very embarrassing and very expensive for cleanup. Competition Bureau dropped its investigation into Loblaw. We talked a bit about that a while ago. I see Shaw Communications have opened up something called the Freedom Mobile phones, but they're going to give you the iPhone X. The 10-year anniversary iPhone is going to be out, going to compete with the big three people that build phones. But their advantage is going to be they're going to give it to you with zero down payment, which is may attract a lot of people in the start to for price points to get into that game. Property tax transfer in BC, they're putting the hammer down on people declaring where your residence is. You have to fill out an affidavit now to state this is my residence. And before, people coming from Asia, China, and other places were claiming they were residents. It was left in the honor system. But now it's subject actually to a jail term if they find it wrong. In BC, drugs, they've approved a new drug. It's over $700,000. $700,000 for a drug, a year price tag for an individual that needs this. And there's not a lot of people with the disease, but nevertheless, there's some people need it. And they said they're now going to provide it. Well, kudos to our pharmacist in Pharmacare in BC. But the challenge for that is they also said it would be decided on a case-by-case basis. And, of course, if it's truly universal, universal means universal. And I don't think they should be deciding on old versus young or male versus female. It should be available to all if you're going to do it. And certainly the taxes are taxed on all. So what do you think? Report calls for action on child poverty. And this is a concern, and this is part of this new industrial age we're talking about, the people laid off and salaries and individual families working on lower incomes. But they're saying in BC in 2015, 18.3% of the children in BC, 153,000 of them, were living below the poverty line, their child poverty. And they say it's even worse when you talk to immigrant children, off-reservation indigenous children. It's even a higher percentage. And we just can't have that. And again, it leads me to this idea of this guaranteed annual income. We have to do something about this. We can't have our children living in that sort of economic depravity. We have to do something about it. They say that even today at the minimum wage in BC, the most a family could make, a woman could make, a man could make, is just over $18,000 a year at the minimum wage. And folks, that just doesn't cut it, as you know, trying to live in Vancouver and $18,000 on minimum wage. So it's broken, it's got to be reset, got to be fixed. And it's like ostriches. We put our head in the sand. This thing is growing around our ears. And businesses that you're involved with, I'm with all institutions, we look at the Egyptian Arab Spring, what takes place. If we don't find some accommodation, some resolution for this, something like a flat tax and a guaranteed annual income to take care of these people on their low-cost housing and to daycare centers and to make sure they have at least bread and food on the table, look how a tipping point that they'll just rise up. You wouldn't sit there idly if your child was starving, and we're doing that to people. So it's time that we have our directing minds have a hard look at this. Della Reese passed away. I like Della, nice songs. She was old too. Uber admits to cover-up 10-year-old hacking. We talked a bit about that in your papers, but this week we're talking about ethics and how ethical is it for an individual to pay $100,000 under the table to the hacker for the pledge not to reveal the information for 57 million people out there. It's an ethical thing. And not tell us about it. At the same time, they're appearing before a Senate board, a Senate commission, who are quite concerned about the security for Uber and tell them everything was all right. So was it misleading, even when they talked in front of the Senate, as they did this? Certainly, with your papers, the message came across clear, and I hope you're posting them up on the site for the rest of your colleagues to read. We talk about the dark side of the data security, data privacy, data sovereignty, data censorship. All those issues are percolating, and it came across strongly in your papers that every business, every sector, and it's not just unique to the one sector in a silo, but it's across all the business sectors have the similar problems. And so they need somewhat similar resolutions. So we need to look at it. And Uber just found that out, the dark side of the internet. They got hacked. Apple, again, talking about what we talked about today, corporate governance and ethics and sweatshops. Apple just found out that its main supplier in Asia has been employing high school students for illegally working and assembling the iPhone 10, and they're not paying them. They call them they're getting work experience, and they're working overtime. 3,000 students from Sensu Urban, they're from the school. Interesting, but it begs the question, if Apple did their best, and this was done unbeknownst to Apple, should they be called into question here about running sweatshops and not obeying sort of worker standards and things of this nature? I recall a while back, I think it was Nike, I could be saying correctly, I think it was Nike that did their very best. They put in place all the protections, all the standards, everything required, wrote into the contracts of the people in Asia saying you will do this and do this, and they sent out Price Waterhouse or somebody to do the audits every couple of months to have a look at to make sure it was going the proper way, and they came back and said everything is fine, the sweatshops are clean, they're working nicely, good lighting, all that sort of stuff. But what they found is that was the front, and that's what the auditors saw. 2 blocks down was the sweatshop, and they never got to see it. They just kept that hidden. But the point is, the Nike got pulled over the coals for that, did its very best to observe what was proper, and still got blindsided. But yet they suffered in their stock prices because of that. And so we could talk a little bit about sweatshops and things like that today. We talked too about ATT and Time Warner very much want to merge. We talk about mergers and acquisitions, come together for the synergies. With the value chains coming together, they see that 2 plus 2 will equal 5, and they want to be able to charge some prices higher because of the synergy on blocking competitors out. And Trump, I wish he wouldn't do this, came out and said he's opposed to that merger. I wish he'd just be silent and let the legal department do what they're supposed to do. They challenged it and saying in the best interest of the consumer that shouldn't happen because we need more competition in the workplace. Because now I think Trump's painted himself in the corner. If as we say, that Steve Bannon, the old strategist for Trump, who's out there now trying to put something together, if CNN comes up, has to be hived off and comes up for sale, don't be surprised if Steve Bannon and a few folks and backers take a run to CNN and take it over, and that solves Trump's problem on dealing with CNN. But he may have shot himself in the foot, because if that was the plan, and it does come to pass, it looks like Trump has orchestrated this thing to have it hived off. So it's art, it's optics. I think Sun Tzu tells us the element of surprise is one of the principles of war, and that's what we should be doing. Roy Moore, on both sides this past week, I'm sure you're tired of it. It seems like from 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night, there's nothing about harassment taking place by both sides of the parties down there, and it's troubling, and no excuse for it. Culture shifts a little bit, still no excuse for it, but the practicalities come to bear that there's 52 seats in the House, and with Moore counting the president, it makes 53 seats, and they need 50 to pass this tax bill and to pass the doing away with Obamacare. And so it's a very fragile balance. They cannot afford to lose more, and if they lost more and a Democrat took it over, it's effectively 2 votes come back down off the line, 1 more for the Democrat and 1 less for the Republicans. And so Trump basically came out and said, all I can say is that he says he's innocent, and until proven, in this country, you should not be prevented from your jobs and punished or tried in the civil thing until you actually get your day in court. And I think most of us believe that if you believe in the rule of law, that is the law. You're innocent until proven guilty. And so here, Moore should be allowed to run, and if he's wrong, it goes to court, and then there's plenty of opportunity then to fire him. But certainly strong pressures these days taking him out, and again, bringing the whole Republican Party in disrepute, that it's down clearly that notwithstanding what your values are and what you think of the man individually, even though it's not been proven, his vote's important, so therefore you'll take him and hold your nose. And so how do you feel with that today? Lots consolidating. This is another thing that made me crazy. Muskrat Falls Hydro Project in Newfoundland. Province of Newfoundland is just over 500,000 people, 525,000 people. The population of Nova Scotia is about 925,000 people. The point is, it's only 1.5 million people in total. And Muskrat Falls is the power generation business they're going to set up to service Nova Scotia, just under 1 million people. And they're spending, are you ready for this number? Just under $13 billion. Newfoundland doesn't have $13 billion. It's coming again from the children's children to build this power plant. And then take $13 billion to service less than 1 million people in Nova Scotia, is the way they say that the energy's for. I suspect you could build everybody a house in Nova Scotia and solar power panel the roofs with it and not build this boondoggle thing up here for less than $13 billion. Anyway, it's worth looking at, again, at these people that spending other people's money. $13 billion is a crazy number. Yellen resigns from the Federal Reserve Board, and all the federal banks are getting together. Canada, Japan, England, Europe, they kind of get together informally and collectively talk to each other about where we should go collectively. And so they've all kind of agreed right now they're going to stop the printing presses in the basement, the money supply, and bring it down a little bit, and just to see what impact that will have on inflation. So we're watching that carefully. And then as she resigns, the new fellow coming in, Jerome Powell, has been there in one of the positions. He's very much in the same pattern as Yellen. Don't expect anything exciting coming through, and an appointment by Trump. I guess that's close to it. The one final thing is Bloomberg this week. Again, talking Winter Olympics, $12.6 billion U.S. for the South Korean Olympics coming up. But they say no Chinese tourists, nuclear threat, and disinterest at home. But again, another $12.6 billion being spent on Olympics at a time we don't have the money. Anyway, folks, I hope you enjoyed today. I'll be here for you. See you next time. Bye-bye.